This is a movie that shouldn't exist. Or at least it shouldn't exist in this way. Its very being sets a precedent that I frankly can't believe I share a plane of reality with. In case you're watching this in 2105 or something and have zero clue what I'm talking about, the bare minimum context goes like this. It's 2016, millions of people across the world, including this goofball and his younger sister, enter movie theaters to watch Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, ostensible sequel to the polarizing Man of Steel. Well, by comparison, BVS is even more polarizing. Like, the Earth might as well have literally been off its axis as my sister and I exit the theater. Some claim BVS is a masterpiece, the likes of which its time and genre have never seen. Others, not so much. Indeed, others willing to give auteur filmmaker Zack Snyder a second chance after he somehow made a Superman movie dreary and lifeless are so burned that the man becomes an easy punchline, a cautionary tale, a creative voice hit with distrust, bit off with good riddance, and that was probably for the best, by his own studio even as tragedy strikes and forces him off the next project. And so begins a years-long battle raging at the periphery of social media and geekdom over the vision of this man. An extended cut of BVS comes out to only slightly less polarizing reception. His planned follow-up, Justice League, already begun filming by the time BVS lands like an asteroid of split opinions, is given to Joss Whedon, who turns out one of the most safe, unmemorable superhero films you'll ever see in what feels almost like an act of deliberate sabotage. And for many people, for most people, that was the last word. Time goes on, actors leave the DCEU, people on both sides of the Zack Snyder debate largely forget about Justice League. But in the background, for 4 straight years, Snyder's most vocal fans, for lack of a better term, bully Warner Brothers into releasing the Snyder Cut, the pure, uncompromised vision of what Justice League was meant to be. Actors throw their support behind the movement, they cite instances of abuse and betrayal from directors and producers while constructing the theatrical cut. They make promises of gold being kept from the audience. Whether or not anyone with any official standing realizes that the most vocal fan voices for this movement are incredibly toxic and only enabled by their support is unclear. HBO Max arrives. The cut is announced. And here it is. At the time of writing this, a narrative is already starting to solidify around this movie, one where even some of the most vocal critics of Batman v Superman and Man of Steel are praising this one as the fun, meaningful, engaging film that those two couldn't be. It makes for, frankly, a weird paradox of a zeitgeist. On the one hand, especially with recent drama having occurred relative to Snyder's ongoing loose association with hate-filled individuals and fan groups, some of whom he's vocally distanced himself from and others of whom he's immortalized in the credits of this film, it's hard to forget that Zack Snyder's Justice League is the end result of a years-long campaign spearheaded by many of these very same hate-mongers, bigots, and grifters, who were so loud and toxic and abrasive that Warner Brothers basically commissioned this movie in a futile attempt to get them off their back. However, at the exact same time, it's also hard to ignore the equally valid narrative of the Snyder Cut as a real symbolic artistic triumph. Take out the part where a studio was basically bullied into releasing this movie by fans who on a good day can best be called entitled and obnoxious, and it's a downright heartwarming case of an artist getting to complete his vision, with the vocal support of others in his field, several leagues of fans who aren't toxic butt brains and just want a story they've been invested in to continue, and a cast who seem to unequivocally love him. This is a guy who gets to literally rewrite a moment in history, overriding massive disservices and even downright abusive behaviors done to that same cast by the WB, by Johns, by Hamada, and by Whedon. Look, I know I don't usually go this hard in laying out or even touching on outside personal context stuff when I review a thing, but for Zack Snyder's Justice League, I feel like it would be irresponsible not to. And the TLDR version is this. The drama of how this movie and its malformed theatrical counterpart came to be, the way it's been willed into existence by forces of light and dark alike, that's not background noise. It is the narrative of this movie and its public reception more so than anything that occurs on screen could ever hope to be. And I just want to acknowledge what an unprecedented and overwhelming moment this is before I try to take this goofy, explosive action movie and place it adjacent to that conversation. And now that the movie is here, what do I think? Me, someone who's clowned on Man of Steel and BVS for years, who argued just as long that releasing the Snyder Cut was a dumb idea. I think it's pretty good. I liked it. I didn't love it, for sure, but you gotta understand how weird this is for me. This movie is up there with Wonder Woman and Shazam and Aquaman as DC movies that I might actually voluntarily rewatch for fun, and not out of some misplaced, morbid curiosity. That's a better reaction than I could have ever expected to have had at any point in the last 4 years. Hell, some scenes I'm shocked that the man who made Batman v Superman was capable of giving us. It honestly makes me kinda more bitter toward BVS and to a slightly lesser extent Man of Steel. You know, assuming most or all of this stuff wasn't shot or rewritten with the criticisms of those movies in mind, because it's as if to say Snyder knew how to tell the kind of superhero story that we wanted, or at least I wanted, this whole time, and just decided we had to wait 2 whole movies before we got that for some reason. It's the same basic plot skeleton as the theatrical release. Evil alien Steppenwolf. He's coming. He's working for other evil alien, Darkseid. Batman gathers Cyborg, the Flash, Aquaman, and Wonder Woman as a response team, and probably also takes a shot at bringing Superman back to life. But where the theatrical release was basically like an air sandwich, this movie actually has things in it that I'm invested in and have a positive response to, and which made some kind of emotional impact sometimes. It's still plenty flawed in ways I don't think it would be under another filmmaker, but for the first time watching a Zack Snyder superhero movie, I can say that I had a net positive viewing experience. It's a freaking miracle. With non-human, seemingly non-sentient bad guys as cannon fodder, meaning I don't have to worry about our characters being brutal murderers with every fight scene, and with a wider variety and array of powers and abilities, it's actually surprisingly fun to just indulge in Snyder's action scenes. I don't know, his uniquely over-the-top brand of spectacle makes for a really fun watch, actually, with all of those kind of moral qualifiers removed, and the collateral damage not nearly as much of an issue as it was in either of the previous movies. There's a bit, I want to say it's around the halfway point, where we see the Flash save some people from like falling debris in real time. It's so cool! A lot of things with the Flash are just dang impressive visuals, although I still think he runs stupid. The real greatest strength of the movie is that the cast actually has a dynamic and a charm to them, both individually and as a group. And like, I didn't even think Zack Snyder could do charming characters for more than like 5 seconds at a time. Cyborg is the best character, probably, and if you didn't feel it before, or if you maybe didn't know the complete context, man, you can just feel watching this movie the tragedy of what was lost in the theatrical cut, and how much of this movie's heart was cut out in losing so much of the Victor Stone material and so much of Ray Fisher's performance. His origin scene is, frankly, to me, the highlight of all 3 of Snyder's movies so far in this universe. Everything from him starting his dad's tape up to him crushing it is just up there with some of my favorite superhero scenes, just period, of all time. It's chef's kiss. And the most insane part of it is that this scene alone gets to the core of Superman in a way that none of the Superman scenes do in any of these movies. Forget Clark Kent. Silas Stone literally turned his son into basically a god among men. Someone with the capacity to be terrifying. And it speaks volumes about Victor, that after all he's been through emotionally and all the trauma he's suffered, it never seems like it's even a question for him whether to use that power selfishly or selflessly. And for as miserable and isolated as he is, and as it can be, he uses this godlike ability that he has on this small, selfless act. And even more importantly than that, he derives joy from it. And he gets fulfillment. And it's just having done this good thing that puts a smile on his face. And it's something that he, Wonder Woman, and Flash have in common. And like, who freaking knew that the key to making those characters more likable in one scene each than Superman gets to be across 2 whole movies was just letting them get some sort of satisfaction and positive feeling from helping people. That's all I need to know about those characters in order to be emotionally invested in them and care about them. I just have to see the fulfillment that helping one person or a group of people can give them. And hey, speaking of them, I think I've finally cracked the code on Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman. By which, I mean, I think I've finally parsed out, after 4 years, whether or not I actually like Gadot's performance as this character. Because, something occurred to me, which is, between her movies and the theatrical cut of this movie and BVS, Gal Gadot has played this character in 4 movies prior to now. And she's had a major role in 2, and she's been the lead in 2. And across all 4 of those movies, I have enjoyed her performance in 1, and that's the first Wonder Woman. And I mostly enjoyed her in this, but I did go back and forth a bit, and I think this movie helped me reason out why that is. And I think the reason is because I don't so much care for Gadot's performance when she has to act out either the angst and the pathos, or really hardcore, declarative action hero lines. I don't think she can do either of those very well. Whenever she has to do like an impassioned speech, or like be really confrontational, I don't know if Gadot can pull that off, necessarily. Where I love her though, is in the small, intimate, really positive, affirming human moments. It's movies like the theatrical cut of this, or BVS, or Wonder Woman 84, which I think fail to play to Gadot's strengths, either by focusing too heavily on the angst, or by not really giving her a character to play at all. And it's kind of weird that you'd think that the perfect superhero would be one half this really charming, empathetic side, and the other half being able to pull off all of the action hero-like lead stuff. And I think it's hilarious that we've got this lead character and this lead actress who can perfectly pull off one half of the equation, and it kind of loses me when she has to act out the other half. And I know not everyone's going to agree with me on that, but that's just where my head is at. More emotionally grounded scenes of Diana interacting with, like, the little people, I guess, in small, intimate human ways, and less serious, heightened action hero speak. I much prefer the Flash in this cut of the movie. Still not sure if I really like Ezra Miller as a performer, but the material here helps him out a lot. I really don't know if I could see this version of the character as the lead in his own movie, assuming that movie ever eventually gets made. But with the rest of the cast to bounce off of, he's pretty charming and likable in this one. Compared to the other 3 that I've mentioned already, Jason Momoa's Aquaman feels a little less well-defined. Mamoa has a natural charisma that I think compensates, but for as much as this movie kind of hilariously does not gel with 2018's Aquaman at all, he, of all characters, feels like the member of the ensemble who's really just kind of in a holding pattern. And he doesn't necessarily really have an arc, he's just kind of here to banter and have some fun moments and some interesting bits of character interaction. Like, he does have some pathos, but he's here to mostly be the same guy at the beginning as he is at the end, until he's actually allowed to grow and change and have a real story in his own movie. Then there's Affleck. To the highest degree that is possible, I think this movie takes Batman's characterization in BVS and pivots it into something that's much more traditional and much more easy to engage with and accept as Batman, you know? I loathed the way that Batman was characterized in BVS, but Ben Affleck has always felt like a natural cast for that character. But it's good to see that Snyder did actually know how to utilize him once he was in a movie where he wasn't just in rabid dog mode, murking people left and right for 90% of his screen time. Fittingly, for much of the movie, he's kind of comparatively stoic, but, and I'm not gonna lie, of the main cast, he's the one that I kind of lose track of, narratively and emotionally. For all intents and purposes, structurally, he's the protagonist of the movie. He's the one with the quest, you know, to bring everyone together, and he's got the big emotional motivating factor, that being his guilt over Superman's death, but for whatever reason, he doesn't leave a super huge impression on me consistently throughout the movie. He's definitively Batman, which is more than I can say for him in the previous movie, but unfortunately he also feels less like a character at times and more like a really well-acted plot device who's in this movie to bring the other, more fully realized characters in. And it feels like, for too much of the movie, his own dramatic arc as a character is mostly background noise. And I think, in large part, that's less to do with how Bruce Wayne is actually written, and more to do with the fact that this movie is, not the best in terms of structure. And here is where we have to get into the actual issues with the movie. Simply put, this movie did not need to be this long. I get that Snyder and the studio are kind of letting him indulge and letting him throw in everything and the kitchen sink because this movie, by its very nature, is a consolation prize. But deciding not to take it as the studio's consolation prize and just taking it as a movie, there's so much here that I think you could get rid of. Or at least, there's a lot here that doesn't need to take up nearly as much time as it does. Like, I get it, the whole appeal of this project was seeing Snyder's completely uncompromised vision, but also, I think the better version of this movie is one that has maybe an hour, upwards of an hour and 20 minutes of it just cut out, or truncated. 4 straight minutes of Bruce traveling through mountains? Cut it. Weirdly intense scene where a lady choir sings Aquaman off into the ocean and one of them sniffs his jacket? Cut it. The F-bombs? Cut all of them. They're unnecessary, they read really try-hard and edgy, and they don't enhance the movie at all. Cut a lot of the slow-mo. There's maybe 1, 2 scenes total in this movie that are actually improved by the use of slow-mo at all. That, frankly, just reads as Snyder's style for the sake of Snyder's style. And even without the slow-mo, some of the action goes on a bit long. Not to say that the action itself isn't fun to watch, I just talked about how it actually is pretty fun to watch, but, you know, there are scenes where, you know, the action isn't even being performed by our main characters, and it just feels like, past a certain point, it stopped informing the story, and it's become pure spectacle, and just for the sake of the movie's pace, can be whittled down or cut entirely past a specific moment. The fight over the mother box in Themyscira, for instance, is something that I think you could easily chop like at least 2-3 minutes off of. Honestly, I wish I could relate to people who say that they feel like this movie flew by or like it felt shorter than it was. Personally, I feel all 4 of those hours, man. And you know what? Are you ready for a spicy hot take? Cut Superman. Cut anything having to do with Superman out of this movie, and I think you get something tantamount to the same experience. Cut Superman, cut Martha, cut Lois Lane. All of their scenes prior to, I want to say, near the very end of the movie, like prior to Superman's role in the climax, all just feel so completely isolated from everything else. Like Lois Lane, we check on her very occasionally. Like, I want to say we get a Lois scene once every 40, 50 odd minutes, and it feels like we only check in on her as a reminder to the audience about why we should care about Superman and the fact that he's gone and want him back. Because again, the previous two movies didn't bother to actually give Superman a rapport with anyone but Lois, so she is our only means of caring about Superman's return as a character. But she's not remotely relevant to the rest of the cast. Like, she is an island away from everything else in the movie for at least the first 2/3 of it. It's not until Superman is already alive again that Lois is so much as acknowledged by the other characters in the film. And it just feels really clumsy and like a real bit of padding that the one character who has a tangible emotional stake in Clark doesn't even really have that brought up in dialogue a lot until it's plot relevant. And if there's one thing this movie does not do, doesn't accomplish, it does not assuage my long-held feeling towards Zack Snyder that he doesn't really get Superman and doesn't really get how to utilize him or his supporting cast as characters, because Superman himself genuinely feels like an afterthought. He's in so little of the movie that it hardly feels like Henry Cavill even gets the chance to give a performance, and it frankly feels like the movie doesn't know what to do with him or have anything to say with him once he is alive. The only reason I think you could see to keep the Clark resurrection plot in the movie is because it's in the process of resurrecting him that we get some charming and neat character moments with the other Justice League members. Like little beats between Cyborg and his dad, or Cyborg and Flash, or Aquaman and Wonder Woman all take place in the attempt to bring Superman back. But beyond those things, I honestly think I challenge a fan editor to edit this movie, take out any reference to Superman past the first 4 minutes or so, and I think you get a movie that feels largely the same but plays smoother and not as clunky, and is also at least 40 minutes to an hour shorter. Aesthetically, the gray as hell color palette just does not do it for me. It's genuinely unpleasant, I'm sorry. Everything is so washed out. It's to the point that the movie might as well be monochrome, honestly, and I do not care for it. It's to the point that I'm convinced the only reason this movie is rated R is because of language. Because there is blood in this movie, but it doesn't even look like blood. It doesn't even look red. That's how not colorful the film is. And like the theatrical cut and its approach to the colors wasn't exactly aesthetically pleasing to me either, but I prefer it to this. You know, I prefer being able to firmly associate characters with certain colors in my mind. I prefer it not looking like everyone is a freaking Twilight vampire. Just, you know, another one of those Snyderisms, those creative decisions that are so completely Zack Snyder and that I think this movie would have easily avoided if anyone else were working on it. Steppenwolf, by comparison to the theatrical release, is a big improvement, at least aesthetically. Like, just looking at it, I still don't love his overly designed pincushion look, but it's better in motion. I didn't expect this to happen, but I think the character is really well served by the really huge, expressive eyes. They're almost cute, honestly. That said, the constant like flexing and shifting of his armor all over the place is distracting. And more importantly, despite the fact that there is some added pathos to him in this cut versus the theatrical cut, I still don't think he's that far removed from just another generic Doomsday villain. Some bits of the score I really dig, others I do not. Flash's theme, or I guess, I don't know, the piece of music that plays as Flash and Bruce Wayne meet for the first time, I found really obnoxious and really distracting from the scene. And the same, unfortunately, applies to Wonder Woman's Like a Battle theme. And it's a shame to say that because I know from interviews that Junkie XL is actually really proud of that musical motif, but it plays literally every time that Wonder Woman or any of the Amazons has an action beat, and I just find it incredibly obnoxious. It doesn't sound nice. I don't think it fits the character. It happens too often. Don't like it. Also, and this isn't like a consistent problem, but there's the occasional edit in here that feels really, really choppy. And I forget whether this was the case in the theatrical cut also, but the scene with the League on the roof, where the team leaves, and they've left Flash and Gordon on the roof, and it's supposed to be a funny moment, something like that is really undercut when the previous frame involved Batman and Flash talking to each other, and then suddenly you cut, and I don't know, in the space of the cut, the rest of the team bounced, and the guy with super speed did not. And finally, to wrap things up here, and this is, I think, my biggest problem with the movie, is the last 10 minutes. Eradicated. I hate the way this movie ends. I hate it. Now, not necessarily the way the story ends. The way the story of this movie ends is actually fairly satisfying. It's nothing amazing and immaculate, but it's good. It's serviceable for the movie that we had. The thing is that this movie's story finishes, and then 10-15 minutes of extra footage is stapled on there that's just sequel baiting. And it's the most clunky, unnatural, does not belong at the end of this movie sequel baiting that you could possibly do. Like, we get the bit that was actually in the theatrical cut of Lex Luthor having bounced from Arkham and him talking with Deathstroke, and the conversation is a bit different, but whatever. That scene is fine. Put that after the credits if you really want to sequel bait. But it's even after that scene where we get a straight up 10-minute sequence where we continue to tease the whole Knightmare scenario. That was, again, another forced, unnecessary, could have been taken out sequence in Batman v Superman. And here, I especially hate it because we build into this movie the idea that Batman recognizes that he was wrong to mistrust Superman. And the whole, Batman's entire character arc in this movie is about having faith in Superman and in the goodness of people and to be an optimist. How do you end that movie with 10 straight minutes of we're back in the post-apocalypse and everything is miserable and the world has ended despite all of our best efforts, and Superman apparently was the cause and still turned out evil? Not to mention, and I cannot believe that we did this, we continue to pound on to the idea that we established in BVS that the only thing that stops Superman from being a complete psychopath is Lois Lane. And that, if anything happened to Lois, then Superman becoming evil is just a given. And Jared Leto's Joker is here, and Leto's performance is just awful. Just the worst. And you can tell that he and Ben Affleck were never once on set together, and it's just such an awkward... the whole scene, I hate it. I hate everything about the scene. There's nothing good about it. And it's so long, and it's unnecessary. And then, as if that wasn't bad enough, and trust me it was, that turns out to be another dream sequence. Bruce wakes up, and the final moments, the final image of this movie, it's not the Justice League together as a team, it's not Bruce, it's not Cyborg, it's not Superman, it's not anything that would have held some relevance to this story or to its themes. It's Bruce being congratulated in front of his house by Martian Manhunter, who was a one-scene cameo in this movie. Like, I just don't get it, man. The final image of your movie, of your story, is supposed to mean something. It's supposed to reverberate back onto the rest of the film and add new layers of meaning. And this is nothing. It's pure fan pandering, contextless garbage. It's like the extreme, steroided up version of the planned ending for Age of Ultron, where after a movie where they're not so much as mentioned, Captain Marvel and Spider-Man were supposed to swing in the last shots of the movie. It's awful. It's truly awful. The last 10, 15, 20 minutes of this movie is so bad that it threatens to destroy the entire thing. And it's really lucky that I enjoyed so much of it for what it was, that I don't think the movie is compromised by an ending this bad. But, I don't know, man. If for whatever reason you're here despite the spoiler warning and you haven't watched the movie, then cut it off after Superman rips his shirt open. You know, he does the thing. Cut off the movie after that point, because that's where the story stops. And everything after that is not story. It's shameless, disgusting sequel baiting, and it almost kills the rest of the movie. Whatever, okay, I'm done. I'm moving on. Does this movie redeem Batman v Superman and Man of Steel? No. I'm not someone who holds to the belief that future installments in a franchise can actually tangibly improve previous installments. Like, you know, there are rare exceptions that I can't necessarily think of right now. But even at my most optimistic, I don't think a version of this movie that turns around and makes BVS and Man of Steel more watchable or more acceptable was actually something that was on the table. What this movie does do is give me just that little bit more faith that Snyder, for all of his faults as a storyteller and all of his, you know, stylisms that I just don't care for, actually does have it in him to be a guy who tells, if not great, then at least really engaging superhero narratives. And, you know, it's both a blessing and a curse, because now I think it's kind of sad that for as much as Snyder says he's not necessarily closed the door on working with Warner Brothers and doing DC stuff, I don't think it's very likely that this vision of his gets continued. I don't think it's likely that we see another Snyder DC movie, at least for a long time. And it sucks that that feels more certain now than it was, with this movie actually being something that I enjoyed as much as I did. But hey, I can say with confidence that I'm glad I watched this movie. If you're someone who thinks Snyder's vision and Snyder's directorial approach will jive with you, then I say absolutely give it a go. You will love it. And even if you're someone for whom that's not true, I think you'll find merit to it. And at worst, maybe you'll find it boring. I don't know. But for Snyder, as an artist, as a filmmaker, as someone engaging with these characters and with this IP, I really do look at this as redemption and as a sign that someone like me who's been so opposed to his not just style but philosophical vision and approach to these characters, I get this one. I jive with this one. I enjoyed myself watching this one. And that, I think, should be taken as a victory and as a redemption. And it's good to get to be able to say that. But hey, what do you think? Did you like this movie? And did you like this video? Did you prefer this sort of in-camera approach? I've done this before, but this is the first time in a while I've done mostly in-camera, scripted but not necessarily down to the word sort of approach. So let me know what you thought about that, as well as what you thought about the film in the comments. If you haven't already subscribed, please do that. I always appreciate new subs. Like the video if you liked it, and beyond that, I'll see you in the future.